Hello, everyone. Welcome to this lunchtime virtual tour of the How to Cook a Wolf exhibition. My name is Sarah Morgan. I use she and they pronouns. I'm the communications and marketing manager for Center for Book Arts. And I'm so thrilled that all of you are joining us today for this program. Before we begin, I do want to quickly acknowledge that Center for Book Arts is located on the ancestral and unceded territories of the Lenape people. And now I'll jump straight in and go ahead and introduce the How to Cook a Wolf exhibition curator, Alison Karasyk, whose name I hopefully pronounced correctly. And I will read her bio for all of you. One moment. Alison Karasyk is an independent curator born and based in New York City. Her research interests focus on the intersection of gender, space, memory, and materiality. Alison completed her BA at Oberlin College, which is also my alma mater, and her MA at the Center for Curatorial Studies at Bard College. And she has very wide-ranging and impressive professional experience nationally and internationally that you can, I'll post the link to her bio in the chat. So if you would like to review that, you can. And Alison, feel free to take it away.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Camilo, and Karina, and Allison, and Zoe, and I'm probably leaving someone important out, but really everyone at the Center for Book Arts. It's been so great to work with all of you and to think alongside you. And thank you to the publication designer, Isabel Chiang, who has been amazing and made this really wonderful 3-color risograph printed book, which has some notes in it that I'll be reading from later. And thank you to Nicole and Keon and Lexi and Giulia and David Zilber, who's also a contributor to the book. So I'm going to dive right in and share a little bit about how I came to the title. So How to Cook a Wolf borrows its title from MFK Fisher's 1942 book of essays and recipes, which basically argues for the possibility of pleasure and imagination during wartime. And so that kind of ethos of thinking about how to move through such a difficult situation of adversity has really informed this project. And so, as I mentioned, the exhibition brings together the work of Nicole Coson, Kiyan Williams, Giulia Crispiani, and Lexie Smith. And the idea for the show, when I first started thinking about this show, it started out in March of 2020. And I had actually just been kind of emergency flown back from Northern Italy amidst the beginning of the COVID pandemic. And I was thinking about, having just returned from Italy, the kind of potential inherent within food and within recipes and within kind of conversations that emerged around the dinner table or the breakfast booth or what have you in that location. However, as the months of isolation kind of unfolded and I continued to have studio visits on Zoom with artists and have plenty of artists as friends. And so we were in dialogue. And as I followed a lot of artists on social media, on Instagram at the time, it became really obvious to me how gathering and breaking bread was not only something that that everyone really missed doing, but how thinking about these materials and rituals at a time when everyone was so far apart felt like a real kind of form of catharsis to battle what we were going through, I think collectively. And so amidst the kind of feelings of grief and depravity, the intimacy of food and its related rituals and its kind of materials really became a way to feel anchored and to feel as though there were still networks and kind of tenderness, even when you weren't able to physically reach out and touch someone, that maybe by thinking about ancestral knowledge or ingredients, or just kind of sharing the act of daily sensation, even if not in person, that food and its materials and its forms could really be a way to continue to feel connected to loved ones, even when alone, and to kind of counter the circumstances. So with that, I'm going to dive right into looking at the works in the gallery. So there we go. Thank you, Camille. So this is the work of Keon Williams, and the project is called How Do You Properly Fry an American Flag? Keon is a New York-based artist, and this project unfolded when Keon was a resident at the Brooklyn-based nonprofit Recess. Keon's work transforms unconventional and quotidian materials through time-based rituals, exposing socio-political, historical, and ecological resonances that mediate contemporary subjectivity, both individual and collective. And so Keon had to reimagine their residency against the backdrop of COVID. And so while this is usually an open studio program that welcomes in all different kinds of publics at all different times of day, the rules were obviously different this summer of 2020. And so Keon began their residency, I believe, in late June or early July. And so this project emerged against when following the murder of George Floyd and in the wake of national uprisings protesting anti-Black state violence. And so Keon was working through these events and was also, this was also occurring against the backdrop of COVID and after months of quarantine cooking, in their words, with friends on Zoom. And so Keon speaks about reimagining their residency as a kind of vehicle to process and lay bare their relationship to American iconography. Of course, this is also happening in the summer when there are all of these kind of patriotic summer holiday barbecues. And so they spoke to me about how this daily interaction of just cooking with friends on Zoom was a really important source of vitality amidst such isolation. So the other really interesting fact about how this project came into being was the fact that Keon was an intern on Capitol Hill at the age of 16. And so they said to me, quote, that they had been ruminating on the intense and deeply patriotic act of raising the flag over the Capitol building daily, exploring the reverence around that gesture and the various codes of how one must interact with this object. So fast forward to 2020, this is still something in Keon's mind. And so what we're looking at now are studies practicing different African-American and Afro-Caribbean culinary techniques, experimenting with different seasonings that were suggested by friends. And so for their residency, Keon invited different friends into the recess space to together think about how to properly fry an American flag. And so this was a recipe exchange, but it was also a moment to reflect on this object and symbol of American identity. And so the stove that we see in the gallery, which is right over there, was handmade by the artist. And this is the actual object that Keon gathered around with friends who shared space with them at recess. And so one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about with this show is the fact that these are all unconventional books, but they're all kind of systems of recording, they're all containers of knowledge, and they all contain forms of knowledge that aren't just about reading, but are about archiving family experience, archiving kind of smell, taste, touch. And so in a lot of ways, this is an archive of oral history and a collective and kind of collaborative effort. Okay, I see we're moving now. So we can move to, that's good, thank you. So now we can move to the monotype prints of Nicole Coson, and I feel very lucky that Nicole is joining us today for this conversation. And so I would say that Nicole was probably the first artist who I really spoke to in depth about this show with. And so it became really clear through our conversations, the way that the kind of materiality of food and thinking about the rituals and recipes and experiences of gathering with family was something that could really touch upon the sense of isolation, longing, alienation, melancholy, but also continuing to kind of be brought home by way of working through food and thinking through, the kind of the objects that adorn the kitchen table. And so just briefly, I'll say that Nicole's distinctive analog printing techniques in terms of everyday objects and her really incredibly beautiful and evocative painting often evoke a ghostly sense of longing where the familiar and the alien kind of overlap and intersect. And I think that that comes up through these really beautiful Bilao mono prints. And I just want to pass the mic to Nicole to talk a little bit about how she came upon making this work.
Thank you. Oh, yes. Can you hear me? Thank you so much for that introduction, Alison, and thank you so much for including me in this show. So the works that I have for How to Cook a Wolf comprises of 3 monotypes depicting an object called the Bilao, which I will explain a little bit more about in a little bit. But to talk about these works, I think I'm going to start by doing a really brief history, dangerously brief history of the Philippines, where I'm from, and what the Bilao is, its origins, and what it's a symbol of now. And later on, I'll talk about what it meant to me personally, or what it came to mean to me during a time of isolation and separation from my culture, my home, and my family. So the Philippines is a Southeast Asian archipelago that's comprised of a little bit over 7,000 islands, and it's bound by the South China Sea with its neighbors are Taiwan, Malaysia, and Indonesia. It's a country that's had a long and rich history of trade and migration with these cultures due to its geographic position in the Pacific. And when I was in grade school, when I was a grade school student and learning about the history of the Philippines for the first time, page 1 always started with 1521, which was when the Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan arrived to our shores, which of course led to then 380 years of colonial rule under the Spanish king, King Philip II. So for a long time when I was a child, any history before that was like just void. To me, it was just like the Big Bang. I had no idea what came before that, and that's just a product of like cultural erasure, which included like a lot of our artifacts, our iconographies, and alphabet. So the Bilao is an object that predates that, as it exists as evidence of the robust influence that Chinese trade and migration has had on the Philippines. So what it is it's simply like a rounder oval tray weaved from bamboo. And there are texts from the Spanish conquistadors finding native Filipino people using it as like this ancient piece of technology to winnow rice. Winnowing rice is this act of separating grain from bits of chaff by throwing the grains up in the air and catching it. And in this process, the wind will blow away the shells and separate it from the edible parts, which fall back onto the tray. So the word Bilao comes from a Chinese word, actually, and it's to me like a symbol of pre-colonial history, as it's an artifact of a period before imperial rule. And you can still to this day find it everywhere, because the Bilao is a staple presence in every occasion: family reunions, birthdays, weddings, promotions, even funerals. It's an extra large vessel for food, or a giant sharing plate that sits at the center of all these moments. So not only is it a symbol of who we were, or might have been before the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors, but its enduring presence made it a symbol of resilience at a time of adversity, a symbol of togetherness, family, and community. So as I said earlier, I'm talking to you guys from London because I live and work in London, and I've lived here for many years, although I grew up in the Philippines. But I've always felt tethered to home because I'm lucky enough to be able to return once in a while for family stuff, holidays, or work when I do exhibitions there. So during the height of the first lockdown, when we were basically removed from our natural lives, and when people were getting really sick and we didn't know what was going to happen, it of course, like with everyone, it took a real toll. So aside from the fear of everything crumbling, the feeling of being away from home just consumed me. And I needed to find a way to cope with this prolonged period of withoutness. And being an artist, I spent that time in the studio making artwork. So in these works, I tried to create the Bilao in different ways, using whatever I had in my studio that was just rags or like pieces of mesh and scrim. And in one of them, I make for my studio practice, I also make these large prints using old window blinds. So I took some of those and then I weave them together like bamboo strips, like the bamboo strips in the original artifact, into the Bilao shape that we know, and imprinted it onto paper with some ink. So with the window blinds, or the office blinds, I started taking parts of my enclosure during this time of isolation, and then the act of like weaving them together and re-engineering them into these sharing plates was to me kind of turning them into a symbol of certainty that one day we'd be sticking forks into a Bilao together again. So yeah, these are the works that you see now in How to Cook a Wolf.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And I think that there's something about the kind of architecture of enclosure that we can feel even in terms of the rich kind of blackness and void in the background of these works, but at the same time, the sense of being able to use them again, and the sense of kind of, of hope, of like quiet hope, and this state of withoutness that you describe it's so beautifully nuanced within the work itself. So really glad that you could join us, and also that you could kind of point me in the direction that this show really turned into, which is very much about, I think, the multidimensional feelings of being alone, but also figuring out ways to feel connected to one's kind of sense of home and community and family, and the way that food can do that. So really, really grateful that you could join us today. I think maybe we can keep going. And if there are questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Thank you, Nicole, for coming from London. So the next work, this is the work of Giulia Crispiani, and Giulia is an artist who is based in Rome. And the The text and the kind of images that we see on this tablecloth are imitating all of these different notes that span 10 years, drawings, recipes from her grandmother's old cookbooks in Italian. And so these are a real combination of different people in Giulia's lives kind of meeting on the surface of the kitchen table. So the work, and you can see if you look at the catalog, the How to Cook a Wolf catalog, this is actually Giulia's kitchen table in Rome. And so she talks about how during isolation, she spread all of these different notes out on her kitchen table when she couldn't reach and access these people, and how there was a real sense of kind of tenderness and love, even in the moment of being alone, just to kind of follow the curvature of their handwriting and the jokes that emerge through the drawings and her grandmother's very precise kind of measuring of certain ingredients. And so she talks about it as a place for all of these different people and moments in time to meet. And she speaks about how it was a real act of intuition to collect notes for 10 years, but that she knew that one day they would come together to make a work. And so gestures of farewell, of hello, of all different kinds of things. And she talks about how it's kind of a combination of her family and her ancestors and her chosen kin, and how they all kind of come together within the surface of the artwork. And then briefly, I'm just going to read a really beautiful excerpt from her contribution to the catalog that I think describes it quite well. So the work is called Cold Weapons, Hot Words, which is actually the title of a chapter from the original MFK Fisher, How to Cook a Wolf. And so Giulia writes, cold weapons, hot words. There were notes left on a table, warm meals and fresh food to bear seasons. Poetic descent begins at the simplest transmission of knowledge, reminders, shopping lists, recipes, greetings, book suggestions, indications, gratitude, love notes, and declarations, admissions written in the blink of an eye, delivered in person, dictated, left on the table on some torn paper. Words that carry already happened gestures, already exhausted meaning, hanging in the hands of the person who finds them. Some we decide to keep, some we request. Sharing a supper is never a metaphor, but always a significant event. The chatter mingles with moanings of appreciation, situated knowledge and oral transmission we use as contour for our story, a way of dressing. A meal, what kind of literature would that be? Pleasure poetry is able to resist time, of a circular time that could possibly return. If a bite could have the taste of a person, a smell, the view to a specific somewhere, a note, the sound of a voice, as if ingredients would be memories, we only pick those we want to share. So that's just the beginning of this very beautiful text that she wrote, but she talks about a meal. She says a meal is a meeting we always tend to keep track of. And so I think it's just an incredibly moving and poignant kind of testament to what it means to sit with the language and also the kind of surfaces where we break bread together when alone and when without loved ones. So yeah, this is a beautiful work that I encourage you to come in to see in person at CBA and to read. And there's also a little mediation book close by in the gallery where Giulia has kind of given limited annotations of each of the original notes, because many of them are in Italian. That's her dining room table again. And so she kind of goes through each of these kind of ephemeral objects and shares her attachment to them. So yeah, I encourage you to go into the gallery and to see for yourself. Thank you. Maybe now we can go to Lexi's project. Great. So this is a project by the artist Lexie Smith. who's an independent researcher and a bread baker. And Lexi is known for her online platform, Bread on Earth, which was originally initiated in 2016 as a place to house, she describes it as a place to house tangential dialogues that stem from the physical and critical study of bread. And so this project essentially expanded in March of 2020 amidst the COVID-19 lockdown in New York, where Lexi is based, when grocery stores and bakeries were shut down. At this moment of foreboding uncertainty, her response emerged from her rigorous research and understanding of bread's vital role within turbulent times throughout history. She writes, and this is from her exchange in the catalog with David Zilber, she writes, "At the beginning of lockdown, I was promptly left with the grain I'd planted and strangers on the internet to interact with. They worked in tandem in a beautiful way. I offered dried sourdough starter to whoever wanted it, thinking it would be a couple hundred people. In the past, I'd done it and maybe 75 participated. This time I ended up sending 1,600 packets of sourdough starter. It ended up being more than that, I believe, to strangers all over the world, and it entirely enveloped my life for the first 2 months of the pandemic. I was not having the experience many were having, questioning what to do with all of my time. I was like, where's my assistant? I was talking to hundreds of people every day, and they were telling me how amazing I was. Like, you're doing such great work. I thought, I'm literally giving you desecrated bodies that I'd otherwise have thrown in the garbage. But you are welcome. I will pay for your stamps. I became a kind of troubleshoot hotline, as I imagined you did as well." She's talking to David here, "for anyone that hadn't cooked in a long time and all of a sudden realized that they had to. And I let the connectivity that I was creating seep in and be what I needed. I was totally captivated by a world that existed outside of my home as a result of one I built in my kitchen." And so the work on view is a kind of archive of this extremely ambitious endeavor where there are recipe boxes that contain correspondence, which she mentions. Right now, we're looking at all of these different images that have been collected from those who participated in the project. So Lexi asked, in addition to some really entertaining emails and notes and questions and snippets of correspondence, she asked everyone who wanted to send photographs of the bread that they baked with her sourdough starter. And so what we see on each index card, which she's organized by country and then in the US by zip code, is a photograph of the bread. And then if you pull the index card out a little bit further, yes, there we see the initials of that person, their zip code, and then there's a tiny hole that's pointed on each, it's hard to see, but that's pointed in terms of where they are on the map. So it's a kind of archive of this network and how it's stretched all over the globe. And then, thank you. And if we move to the recipe box to the left, actually, thank you. Then we can see what she mentions, which are, she's pulled out these really great keywords: angel, humble, bless. And so it's amazing just thinking about how during the start of Corona, I think especially just the act of connecting with a stranger on the internet was such a source of calm and something that so many needed. And so these are some really entertaining conversations, people asking to pay her, people just sharing how deeply helpful this act is. And for her, I think it was also kind of an act of intuition. What could she do? What could she do to help? And what could she do to spread this material? So yeah, there's some really great excerpts here, and everyone's name has been crossed out. So their last name, so it's not too personal. Or too exposing, I should say. And then if we move a little bit further to the right, thank you. So that is a box of 4 types of grain that Lexi actually grew in the ground and that she describes as a kind of inflection point. Thank you. And then there's also 5 grams of sourdough starter, which is the amount that she sent to each person that inquired. And then there is a dried durum wheat teardrop, which is just a kind of reference to, of course, the emotion and intensity of this moment and what it means to be in contact even with a stranger and have them kind of notice you and respond to you, and what it means to bake bread or together even when apart. And then all the way to the right is a Rolodex that includes photographs. It includes images of a video that Lexi made, 12 hours of her working with the grain herself after taking it from out of the ground. There's dried flowers, recipes, postcards, all different kinds of kind of ephemera that emerged from this project. A lamb that they bottle fed on the farm that on Sky High Farms, which is where she's worked on this grain growing program. And yeah, it's just different kind of materials that I think let her get through this time, and that also were given to her by all of these strangers that she corresponded with. Some really great photographs, a bread sculpture that she herself made with a stone in it. That's what we're looking at now. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alison. If you couldn't tell, that was me assisting our wonderful programs manager, Camilo Otero, in the gallery, looking at Lexie Smith's archive. I'm sorry, I just want to make sure, Alison, did you have anything else that you wanted to add about the exhibition? Like
I just wanted to kind of, again, just bring up the catalog. And I think that what this show, I think in some ways is aiming to do is to kind of act as a counter resource. So the fact that we've been just completely inundated over the last 18 months with headlines about how doomed we all are all the time. I think what this show does, or what it's aiming to do, and what the artists at least have done so beautifully, is to kind of touch down into an area of the personal, and to think about how these objects are really intimate repositories, but they're also recording history. They're recording history according to individual experience. And I think that they do something each really special in the way that they kind of offer an alternative to the doom, and a way to kind of move through the circumstances and to continue to create connection and to experience tenderness and intimacy and solidarity, even when away from one another. So yeah, that's I just wanted to add that. And so I think that similarly, hopefully the catalog can be a kind of counter resource. And so it contains entries or statements from all of the artists in the show. And it also holds a wonderful foreword from Karina Reynolds, the executive director at CBA. Thanks, Karina. And there's a curatorial introduction from me. And then there's a conversation between Lexi and David Zilber, who is a kind of master fermentation expert and a chef and a photographer, and was one of the first people to cook for me during the course of all of this. And so it's a really great conversation that kind of brings together their personal and kind of professional pursuits, and how fermenting and baking bread and cooking just got them through this time, and how their relationships to time really changed according to the pandemic and the other events that followed. So just wanted to mention the catalog, and it's available online and at CBA.
Thank you so much. I added the link to the catalog to the chat. So if anyone wants to click on the link there, they can. They can also find it featured prominently on Center for Book Arts' website, which is centerforbookarts.org. Thank you so much.